Hello everyone, I hope you are doing well. Like always, I will be your host tonight, Mr. Dead Sleep. Right now, I'll be taking you through 5 true scary stories that I came across on the internet. Before we get started, likes and subscribes are appreciated, and if you want to comment, please do. But right now, just sit back, lay back, whatever is most comfortable for you, and enjoy. Okay, our first true scary story of the night is titled, Help Me, I'm Lost. This is my first post, and it is a true story. I was living in a rural area in Oklahoma with my mother at a small lake house, and I'm probably 10 or 11 at this time. One night I'm sleeping in my room when I randomly and abruptly wake up for no reason. This was not normal for me, and I felt very uneasy. The only sound I could hear was my mother snoring in the next room on the couch. I rolled over and tried to go back to sleep, but my need to use the bathroom was growing more urgent, so I grudgingly forced myself to head that way. The bathroom is on the other side of the house, around a corner and past the kitchen, and finally down a long hallway on the right. So after I made the trip and finished my business, I flipped off the light switch and started heading back to bed. That's when I heard the distinct click of the light switch, and I saw the glow of the bathroom light in the hallway. Terrified, I slowly turned around to witness the light in the bathroom start clicking on and off. Click, 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 click. Finally, it shut completely off. In the dark of the hallway, my eyes began to make out a white shape near the end of the hall. It was around my size and crouched to the floor. At this point, I'm frozen to the spot as my mind begins realizing that no one else is home except for my mom and myself. Then the white shape began whispering in a quiet man's voice, "Help me, I'm lost." I remember wanting to scream for my mom, but I couldn't, and instead I barely said, "No," before this thing starts running at me on what sounded like all fours. I quickly ran through the kitchen and around the corner before running to my sleeping mother, shaking her awake. I remember saying, it's coming," and my mother's eyes going from dazed to alert in an instant. She asked me what was going on, and I saw her eyes look over my shoulder before she screamed. Remembering her scream still makes my blood run cold. Never had I heard pure terror like that in my life, even to this day. She grabs me by the arms and pulls me into my room and slams the door. She holds me in her arms with her back pressed against the door as we listen. It sounded like this thing was running around in circles in the kitchen. We could hear his hands and feet slapping against the tile. The kitchen had a sliding glass door to the outside, which sounded like it was thrown open then slammed. We sat there horrified until daybreak. I was sent to my grandmother's in the next town for a while after that and never set foot in that house again. Years later, my mother said she went walking around the property after the incident and came across a small burial site with 3 headstones that each belonged to children from the early 1900s. It still freaks me out because what I heard that night was a man's voice, but it was so unnatural. My mom still will not tell me what she saw behind me and what it was that made her scream. She tells me she's afraid it will know we're talking about it and will come back. This is the first of many weird things that have happened in my life. Okay, moving on to our next true scary story of the night. This one is, neighbor believed she was being stalked and preyed on by the man in the unit below hers. This happened when I was in elementary school. Me, my brother, and mom had immigrated to Canada a few years prior to this incident. We moved into a rental apartment which consisted mostly of new immigrants. One day while we were waiting for the elevator, a woman and her disabled daughter walked over and waited with us. They were speaking Farsi, but a dialect that was spoken in Afghanistan, not Iran where they were from. This caught my mom's attention quickly, and she was ecstatic to find out that a fellow Farsi-speaking woman was living just a couple apartments down from us. They began speaking, and it was evident that her daughter was not able to speak or communicate via sign language due to her severe disabilities. My mom and her would bump into each other frequently around the building and neighborhood. The man she believed was targeting and stalking her daughter was a single dad of a girl a couple years older than me. I knew them both well, and I even babysat their dog a couple of times. His daughter told us her parents had divorced and her dad got custody of her. One night, me and my mom had just gotten home and were stepping out of the elevator when we bumped into the lady. She approached us and said it was her daughter's birthday and insisted we join them for some cake. I always felt very weird around her and was not eager to join them at all, but my mom said she felt bad and that we wouldn't stay long. We followed her into the apartment and immediately the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Her daughter was sitting in the dark with only a small nightlight lighting up her furnitureless house. In the middle of the living room was a cloth spread out picnic style that consisted of a few plates and forks and a homemade cake. We sat down and we were starting to get comfortable when my mom's phone started to ring. This startled all of us. Just as my mom picked up the phone, the lady hurried into the living room. She was in the kitchen making tea and told my mom to put her phone on silent. She said you need to be as quiet as possible so he doesn't know we were home. I immediately shat my pants. Who was she talking about? My mom apologized and asked her what she meant. That's when she started telling us that the man from the unit below her is tormenting them. She went on about how he hits the ceiling with a broom all hours of the night to let them know he knew they were home, and that one time her daughter was lured onto the balcony by him and was being persuaded by him to jump. She said he would knock on their door in the middle of the night and would whisper the devil's prophecies through the door. My mom asked her why she never reported this, and she said she was scared he would find out and kill them. She said they don't turn on the lights, they don't own a TV, and she never makes noise and only whispers when home. We had cake, thanked her for inviting us, and got up to leave. She tiptoed to her door and motioned with her hand to stay out of view of the door, and we did. She slowly opened the door and peeked outside, looking left to right, turned to us, and said we were okay to go. As soon as we got home, I told my mom that there was no way what she was saying was true because I knew the people who lived in that unit. My mom said it was best not to get involved and forget about it. Weeks go by and we don't see her or her daughter. One morning I was leaving our building to go to school when I noticed letters taped onto the walls of the lobby. They were scattered, but I was a kid and thought they were letters put by the building management. I opened the lobby doors, and that's when I saw the letter taped to the building intercom. The letter was written by the lady explaining how terrified she was for her and her daughter's life, and how no one has done anything to help her with the situation despite numerous attempts. She went on about the same things she said to us. The last paragraph sent chills down my spine. She claimed that she was raped and impregnated by a demon in her sleep, and now he has found her and her daughter and was possessed by this man. She said if something happens to either of them that we should find ourselves responsible. I ended up asking the girl and her dad what that was all about, and her dad claimed to have only ever seen her twice, both times of which he hadn't made eye contact with her because she was talking to herself, and he was creeped out. He said she would slide notes under his door with what he later found out to be Arabic writing. He said he showed it to one of his Arabic friends, who confirmed they were verses from the Quran that is used by Muslims to protect themselves from evil. He said he had no idea it was her doing this till the letters started being plastered around the building on every floor. Apparently they were asked to move out of their apartment, and she had threatened to light herself and her daughter on fire. The management had contacted the police for being a threat to herself and others. After a while, we forgot about it and went on with our lives. We moved to a different part of town not too long after, but this event has always stuck with me. In 2015, I went back to the old complex due to reconnecting with a childhood friend who still lived there. I ran into the building manager, and he and I got to talking, and I asked about the incident and if he ever found what really happened. Apparently, the lady was schizophrenic. She was a victim of forced marriage at a young age, and her daughter's disabilities were the result of the extreme abuse she endured while pregnant. Extremely sad. Turns out she was extremely mentally ill and full-heartedly believed the claim she had made. Apparently, her daughter was in fact capable of speaking, but her mother did everything in her power to isolate her from outside contact and society. Me and my mom thought she was around 14 to 16, but turns out she's a 30-year-old woman. She was very malnourished and lacked personal hygiene and was obviously not properly taken care of. Her daughter had never once been to the hospital or a school. I have updates, but I didn't expect it to be this long, so if you guys are interested, I will post an update. And that's the end of that story, and if there is an update, I'll be sure to narrate it. Let's move to our third true scary story of the night. This one is titled, Not My Mother. So this story happened about 11 years ago. I was a senior in high school at the time, but it was the single most mind-boggling thing I'd ever experienced. It's also important to note that it happened in mid-December. I am from Iowa, and the winters here get cold at night. Like if you get stuck outside, you will die kind of cold. That, plus the snowfall, makes everything dead silent. You can hear anything and everything inside the house, and even immediately outside of it. Well, me and my best friend were hanging out in my family's walkout basement, just having a boring winter night playing video games. We were also the only ones home. The reason it was just us is because my mother went from work straight to a bar to grab a few drinks with coworkers. So me and my friend thought it would be a good idea to break into the family wine and have a little. As we were sitting there opening up the first bottle, I hear the door to the garage open and slam shut. I immediately go, oh shit, and start looking for places to hide the bottle. My friend then says, I thought you said your mom was supposed to be out all night. She was, I replied. I then heard a few heavy stomps and hear my mother yell out, "MeowsandBoo? Anyone home?" I yell back up the stairs, "Yep, just hanging out in the basement." I hear a few more steps move from the garage door towards the stairs and she yells out again, "Can you come help me with something? I need you up here." I reply back while frantically trying to find a good place to hide the wine bottle. "Yep, give me just a minute." Then there was silence for about 20 seconds. "Anyone down there with you?" She yelled back in a more concerned, serious tone, in a voice that was slightly off from my mother's. This was the first thing that told me something wasn't right. Our family never cared if anyone was over, as our house was a very open house to all family and friends, and the voice, it was just wrong. Like it sounded like my mother's, but it was missing something that I couldn't put my finger on. Weirded out, I replied back, "Just Colton." After I yelled that back to her, I found a good place to hide the wine bottle and began walking up the steps to the next level. Now, as I was walking up the steps, I couldn't help but feel the overbearing silence of the house and the slight electric twinge that something wasn't right. When I got to the top of the steps, I look over to where the door of the garage is and also the kitchen right next to it, and it's black, pitch black. All of the lights were off, and there was no moonlight shining through any windows. I walked over to the kitchen yelling out, "Mom, where are you?" There was no reply, just silence and darkness. I feel the electric twinge turn into full needles and my adrenaline kicking in full force. I have to get out of here as fast as possible. My mother was not home. I run back down the stairs, grabbing my coat along the way. "What's wrong?" Colton says. "My mom's not home," I reply as fast as I can. looking for my truck keys. "What do you mean? You were just talking with her." I could see the confusion in his face. "There's no one home. We need to leave now." I took a few steps towards the back door that opens up to the yard, and then I see my dog shaking on the couch and my cat growling behind it. I couldn't leave them. I just knew if we had left, something would happen. "Are we leaving?" Colton said, still confused as hell. "No, I can't leave them here alone. Something is really off. I'm going to call my mom and figure this out." I pull out my phone and call my mom. She picks up immediately. "MeowsandBoo? What's going on?" She answers, "Mom, you were just home. I heard you yelling for me from the second level, and when I went up, you weren't there," I said frantically, hoping that she was playing a joke. "No, I'm just leaving the bar. I wasn't feeling very well. Are you okay? What do you mean you heard me?" I fill her in on the whole story and she rushes home. Colton and I stayed in the basement with the animals until she got home, but before she did, you could hear something upstairs. Not walking or sitting on things, but a pressure in the air, like a black hole was slowly moving from one room to the next, and the word that I would instinctively describe it as is hungry. When she got home, you could feel the thing leave just as quick as it came, like an overbearing predatory presence that had just flown away. We still have never figured out what the hell was going on, and this is just one story of many unexplainable things that have happened to us, but this is the easiest to write down, and one that I was happy to have witnessed. My mother has passed away now, and I have moved away to Arizona, but whenever I go back to Iowa and I see Colton, he still gets creeped out by what had happened. I will never truly know what happened, but I know that whatever it was that had my mother's voice, it was evil and it was hungry. Okay, let's move into our next true scary story of the night. This one is titled Scary Sleepover Story. I've always been good friends with one of my cousins, Cole, who's the same age I am. The two of us were not quite inseparable, but we always did get along very well together, and were often found together, both in school, as we'd always wound up in the same class together throughout elementary school and outside of it. When we were 12 and in 6th grade, I was hanging out with Cole on a Friday afternoon around the later part of May, and we were psyched at the start of the weekend. We wound up at his house since he didn't live too far from me, and at one point my mom called to say that our grandpa was in the hospital. While the issue with our grandpa wasn't expected to be life-threatening, he was being kept at the hospital overnight for observation, and both my parents and Cole's were planning on staying with him and my grandma at the hospital, since my mom and her sister were the only two siblings who lived close by. I was told that I was given the okay to stay at Cole's house for the night, with Cole's 15-year-old brother Hunter being in charge while our parents were out. This was fine by us. I got along well with Hunter, and he was never the bossy older brother/cousin that some of my other friends said they had to put up with. We ordered out for pizza and enjoyed goofing off as boys that age tend to do. At around 9 or so, there was a knock at the front door, and Cole went to answer it. I was a bit curious as to who it could be at that time of night, and so I watched from a ways back. At the door were two older guys. They said they were with the city and that they were investigating reports about the water pressure supposedly being bad in the neighborhood. They asked Cole if his parents were home, and when Cole said they were unavailable at that moment, which we were told to say to strangers if our parents weren't home, the guys started asking a bunch of questions about how the water pressure was in the house and if they could come inside to check. Hunter came over at that point and politely told the guys that the water pressure was fine and perhaps they should move on to check on other homes in the neighborhood. The guys seemed reluctant to leave, but turned and walked away after Hunter started closing the door. After the door was shut, we looked at each other and shrugged, but didn't think too much of it after that and went back to goofing off, Eventually, we decided to go to bed. Cole and Hunter shared a bedroom, and we all agreed that I'd sleep in there with them, rather than me hitting the sack on the couch or something like that, so that we could talk while we fell asleep, and Hunter grabbed a sleeping bag out of their camping supplies for me. When we got into their bedroom, they stripped down to their briefs, and I remembered Cole had mentioned to me once a while back that they had started sleeping in just their underwear. Since I hadn't originally planned on staying the night, I hadn't brought anything with me from home as far as overnight stuff, but since I wasn't in the mood to sleep in my clothes, I stripped down to my briefs as well, though I felt a bit embarrassed, even though we were all guys there and I knew they wouldn't say anything or be judgmental. They climbed into their beds and I quickly crawled into the sleeping bag, and after talking for a while about random stuff, we eventually fell asleep. Early the next morning, I got up because I had to pee, and so I quietly got out of the sleeping bag and went and did my business in the bathroom. On the way back to the bedroom, I heard something in the family room, which was on the opposite end of the house from the bedrooms and particular bathroom I was using. I didn't pay too much attention to it at the time, thinking it must be either Cole or Hunter, until I got back into the bedroom and realized that both of them were still in there. Trying not to panic, I woke them and told them that I thought someone was in the house. They quietly followed me, and the moment we walked into the family room, we saw the two guys from the night before in there, and it was rather clear they were robbing the place. One of them started moving towards us as he pulled out a wicked-looking knife. The three of us promptly raced to the front door, somehow managed to get it unlocked and open, and we fled outside. As luck would have it, a cop was driving by at that particular moment. We quickly flagged him down and told him about the two guys in the house. The cop called for backup, and within a couple of minutes, several other cops were there, and they proceeded to enter the house. And after some searching, they caught the two guys. The cops figured out that the two guys must have entered from a window in the laundry room that had a broken latch, and had probably targeted that house because, while it wasn't empty, they probably realized there were no adults there and figured that if we discovered them, we could be as easily dealt with than adults. To add insult to injury, while we were waiting outside while the cops searched the house, both to get the two guys and make sure that there was no one else with them, some of the neighbors came out to see what the commotion was about, and this included some kids who went to the same school as Cole and me, including a few who were in our 6th grade class with us. It was during that time that the three of us realized that we'd never had the chance to get dressed. So just like in the stereotypical nightmare, we had to stand outside in full view of everyone in just our briefs for what seemed like forever before we being allowed back inside. When we went back to school on Monday, Cole and I had to put up with more than a bit of snickering, stares, and ribbing for the next few weeks until school ended for the summer. Okay, that was a unexpected ending, but a fun one. Let's get into our last true scary story of the night. This one is titled Gray. This happened when I was in middle school. When I was around 13 or 14 years old in the early 90s, I used to play PC games on my uncle's old 386 PC. My uncle, who is my dad's brother, used to live in my grandparents' house. It was a fairly large house since my dad had 5 siblings, along with my grandparents, and they had different rooms. The PC was in the large living room, and the hallway leading to the bedrooms was on the right. At that time, only 3 people were living there, my uncle and both my grandparents, since my other uncles and aunts already moved out. Now, my uncle was an introvert and mostly just stays in his room, coming out to get some coffee, then going back in. The same thing for my grandparents. So most of the time, it was like an empty house. I lived in a house just near it. Anyway, I used to play for hours on end on that PC in the living room. Sometimes my uncle would stand near watching me play, asking me stuff about the game. But pretty much I was mostly alone and it didn't really bother me. Until one night. Around 7 or 8 p.m., I was playing on the PC. The lights were off, as usual, and I felt my uncle stand behind me. I then talked about the items I had on my characters, the dungeons, etc., but he wasn't talking. I really didn't care, so I just went on talking about my game. About 5 minutes later, the lights in the hallway turned on, and out came my uncle carrying his cup to get some coffee. I was stunned. If he was there, then who was behind me? I slowly turned my head and saw that it was wearing something gray. I immediately got up, ran out the door, not bothering to turn off the PC. I even heard my uncle say something, but I couldn't understand whatever it was he said, as I was really scared. I told my mom about it, but she just laughed at me. The next morning, I went back to the house and saw my uncle making some coffee. He scolded me for leaving the PC on, then asked me why I suddenly ran out. I just kept silent that time. Then I asked him if there was a ghost in the house because I thought I saw one last night. He just laughed at me and said, "Of course not. They're not real. There's no ghost wearing gray in the house." I was surprised because I didn't tell him it was wearing gray, so I told him about that. Then he put his cup down, a bit stunned, then whispered to me, "That's why I stay in my room. I see it too." Okay, that was our last true scary story of the night. I hope you had a good time and found these narrations to be creepy but entertaining. If you haven't already, I hope you give this video a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button for more weekly spooky stories. Time for me to go, but I'll be back before you know it. I'm Mr. Dead Sleep. Good night.